Three, two, one, and we are live. Amy, thank you so much for coming on my show. It's always a pleasure to have people of your caliber come on. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kane, for having me. I'm coming to you from San Diego, California today.
I was in San Diego very briefly before the pandemic hit in Feb last year. I was doing a tour of LA, LA, San Francisco, and Las Vegas, and we had to pass through San Diego to get to San Francisco, I believe, or one of the two. But
Wonderful. Doing the California tour.
yeah, I did a full California tour. I have never done a road trip through the United States before, and it was amazing. It was like one of the best times I've ever had. We rented like a giant Ford Mustang, the purest American muscle car that we could get, and we just drew it. We drove it all over the place. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I wanted to get into first. You're a journalist. What made you go down this career path in particular?
Well, Kane, I was always interested in media and storytelling and photos. And even in high school, I was on my high school yearbook club and just always fascinated with watching the news every night. My parents sort of groomed me to pay attention to current events, understand the world we live in, and kind of turned into a news junkie. And when it came time to picking a career field, I knew I wanted to travel, and I'm a people person, so I enjoyed telling stories about people, and but primarily though, I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to be a United States Marine. So what led me to joining and enlisting in the United States Marine Corps was the option to become a combat correspondent, was the official job title. And so I thought I could be a Marine and take photos and travel the world and talk and tell stories about Marines. Sign me up. I wanted to be in the Marine Corps, and having a job that I loved was even icing on the cake. So that's how I first got into journalism. I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and they sent me to journalism school, a top-notch military training campus where they trained us in journalism, like the formal journalism training, how to write, how to take photos, everything from photo composition to developing in the darkroom back in those days, and producing content. This is long before social media, but how to draft a newspaper, how to do layout and design, all the things that would go into a university level journalism school.
There must have been like a military twist on that, though, because you were a combat correspondent, right? So you must have undergone through some military training as well, I would assume.
Indeed. So in the Marine Corps, of course, their mentality is you're a Marine first, means that you're a rifleman. So I went through military Marine Corps boot camp, and then I went to my school training. So in the military boot camp, 11 weeks of boot camp, Parris Island, South Carolina. So all the things you would expect is marching, going to the rifle range, learning how to do land navigation, field operations, learning the history, traditions, customs, courtesies of the Marine Corps. And then once you complete that, you move on to your job training. And I almost spent a year at the schoolhouse that was in Indiana at the time, is where the school was located. So I spent a year in Indiana. So I learned everything that had to do with radio, broadcasting, TV, print, photos, writing, community relations, media relations. So I got a year's worth of really intense military. It was all military members going through the school. But after a year of that, I was ready to go on to my first duty station.
And where are you at right now?
So back when I finished the schooling,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So going to my first duty station, I got orders to a place called Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So you may be familiar with this.
Yeah.
Your audience may be familiar with the Navy's base called Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And at the time, this was in 1994, where I got my first assignment. And I was familiar with the base because the popular movie called A Few Good Men, starring Tom Cruise, had just recently been released. And so I thought, oh my God, where am I going? Where the storyline in the movie A Few Good Men was that a Marine was killed and there was a code red, and we were fighting with the Cubans, and we were and Fidel Castro, the shadow of Fidel Castro. So I got my orders. I arrived on Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and obviously a lot of anxiety, but I went there to work in their radio and television station on the Navy base. So I was doing radio and television reporting for the military members on the base. There's about 5,000 service members and their families stationed on the very isolated base on the island of Cuba. And at this time, and just a few months after I arrived, international incidents had been brewing where Cubans and Haitian migrants were fleeing Cuba and Haiti by the thousands. It was a big mass exodus. And so before you know it, my assignment turned into a nice little cushy island assignment, turned into a full-blown joint task force mission of receiving and expected to house 70,000 migrants that were picked up at sea. So at this time, there was a mass exodus. People were trying to get to the States. So the policy was at the time in Florida, the 1 foot down policy. So if you had 1 foot down on the sand in the water, you were able to be granted asylum from Cuba. And at that time, people would get on the rafts. It's only 90 miles from the tip of Florida to Cuba. And so people would risk their lives, their livelihood, their families, just to get on a raft and try to make it to America. And so at the meantime, there were thousands. They were dying at sea. The Coast Guard picked them up, brought them to the base, and we turned our football field and our gymnasium into a sheltering place for these thousands of migrants that came to the base. So that was my first experience of working in a military operation.
Why did they flee
What?
Cuba?
Well, they were fleeing because of years and years of oppression, and they felt that the policy was such that if they felt that they could make it to the States, they could get a better life. So through the years, and periodically there would be one boat here, or a boat there filled with 20, maybe 30 people. And so at this time, people were just making a break for it. I don't think there was any one catalyst of why all of a sudden, but President Clinton was the president at the time, and the policy was that he would allow migration efforts if they were seeking asylum, political asylum from the country of Cuba. It had an adverse effect because the people in Haiti at the time, the president was Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and there was a massive coup there, and the conditions were so horrible. People there heard that Cubans were getting asylum in America, so they thought they also were going to try to get asylum. Unfortunately, however, the political status of Jean-Bertrand Aristide and those Haitians as Haitian citizens did not have the same political asylum exemptions because Cuba was communism, Haiti was not communism. So they then started to flee by the thousands and try to come to America, but they were not granted asylum under any circumstances. So they brought them all to the base in a holding pattern just to figure out how to bring people in a safer way, instead of just allowing them to touch down on the streets of Florida and Miami and be, not left with any support services. So that influx of tens of thousands of people then came to the base, and we had to erect, tents and food and provide medical care for those people that were coming. Many died at sea. Many children were orphaned at sea. Their parents succumbed to the conditions or the shark infested waters that were between the island of Cuba and Haiti to the States. So it was very eye-opening, my first experience at how the military really was the response force of providing shelter and food and helping them with everything that they need, their medical care and such. So I was getting the firsthand look as a military journalist reporting on this first big event that would be the first of many in my career. So that was the first welcome to the military, where you are going to be in the front row seat to many interesting things in a year now, 28-year career so far.
And this was in 94.
1994, that's correct. The summer of 1994 is when this mass exodus occurred, luring thousands of Haitians and Cubans to the shores of America. But there was just so many. We had to have a holding pattern for them. And Guantanamo Bay just seemed to be the most likely feasible place to store or house these people for the time being. And so additional military members were brought from the States to accommodate this ramp up, because it was a sleepy little Navy refueling station just to have a foothold there on the island of Cuba, small little base. And it turned into a massive, on a base that was designed for 4,000 people, military and their service members, families, now turned into a base that was housing 60, 70,000 people. So we had to have water rationing and electrical rationing as well. So the water would be turned off every other day, like no showers, and the electricity was rationed. So like every other day, the electricity would go out just to
Wow.
conserve electricity. So many other things that occurred there. So that was my welcome to the military experience. So many photos that I took and interviews that I took was just a really a great learning experience. And the reporting that I did, my entry-level job, radio and television as well. So and just learning how the military can mobilize for good, and they're the ones with the helicopters and the personnel and the expertise to do humanitarian assistance.
After this was done, what was your next assignment?
From that, I had a follow-on assignment to Camp Pendleton, California, and that's located in North San Diego County, right on the beaches of the Pacific Coast. And I remained there for many years while I was on active duty, and ended up transitioning from active duty into the reserves from this location. And so basically what they said, they got off active duty. And from there, after 8 years of service, I finished up my schooling, my bachelor's degree, and went on to get my master's degree. But I remained in the Marine Corps Reserves because I loved the Marine Corps. I loved the people and the missions. But I also, back then, before they had online education and hybrid learning, I had to go to school in person during the day at the university. So that was a choice I made to do that, to finish my education and still remain in the reserves. But at this time, at that point, 9/11 happened. And so that was sort of a real turning point in my career, a turning point for many people. But for me, that was sort of the
Yeah,
point of,
you served in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. I
that's
assume
correct.
those must have been some crazy times in Iraq and Afghanistan both.
It definitely was. Well, after 9/11, so my big plan was I was going to be the next Barbara Walters or Katie Couric, or these are some famous TV journalists, right?
Mhm.
I thought that I was off to the races. I was going to finish my degree. I was going to work in TV and be a big famous TV journalist reporter. Well, little did I know how much 9/11 would really change the trajectory of my career. So I was mobilized to active duty in 2002. So a year into Afghanistan, when we first sent troops to Afghanistan right after 9/11. And then we started to build up some operations in 9/11. We were fighting the Taliban there. We realized that we needed more resources, so that I was mobilized to active duty. This was before Iraq, though. So my first tour in Afghanistan started in 2002, and I did that for 7 or 8 months in the early days of Afghanistan. And at the same time, in early 2003 is when Iraq really kicked off. But I returned home. I actually finished my degree in between that in 2005, and then I got mobilized again to go to Iraq for the first time in 2006. And we're 3 years into the war in Iraq, and Afghanistan is still brewing. But in 2006, I was sent to Anbar province, where cities like Fallujah and Ramadi, places that your listeners might be familiar with of hearing it in the news. It was at the height of the war in 2006. Service members were dying literally by the dozens every day. The height, I think, of a monthly casualty rate was about 130, 135
Wow.
per month. People were dying. And so it was just a really, really difficult time to be there. Not only difficult to just function every day, the heat, the pressures and the mission, the uncertainty, but when fellow service members were risking it all and dying or getting injured, catastrophically injured, it was very, very difficult emotionally to still maintain a high level of motivation and still continue to go out every day on mission. So it was my job to document the foot patrols, the mounted patrols, going through vehicles with the troops. I needed to document this because at this time, many of the media were not coming to Iraq because of the danger, because the high casualty rate. And so many of those media relied on imagery and video taken by military members. So when we would send them imagery and videos of our missions every day so that they could air it on their nightly news. And so we would, I took actually also a satellite dish around Anbar province to get interviews with US commanders, Iraqi commanders, and we would do live broadcasts to tell people what was going on in these really remote cities.
You had a remote, like a mobile satellite dish that you were carrying around.
That's right. Yes,
Wow.
it was actually not very small at the time. Back then, it was in 4 containers, and we had 4 big containers that we had to lug around, basically. So we'd move around the province at night because it was too dangerous, really, to fly by air during the day because the helicopters would get shot down. So in the middle of the night, we would lug these big containers, and by morning we would have them set up on the top of a roof somewhere, ready to go live for Iraqi commanders and US commanders to reach a US audience. And then we also were targeting and reaching pan-Arab media, all the Arab media, Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, Al Hurra, all these really prominent pan-Arab media sites. We would do live satellite uplinks with them to tell people we're fighting the insurgency, stay in your home. We were supporting the US forces to try to help them better understand what was really going on. So we had to reach a local audience. By this time, there were no Iraqi media really able to move around the country like we were because the people were just too afraid of getting hit by an IED or getting caught up in a firefight somewhere. So we took a lot of risks by moving this satellite dish around the province to try to do these satellite uplinks. In the meantime, we would also go out with troops and get the imagery needed to support these interviews. So media would do live interviews with commanders, and then we'd also share our video from the day before or that week of what was going on so they could talk to it. So that was a whole year. That was a year-long deployment in 2006. So I certainly learned a lot of lessons about taking risks and just how important the work we were doing was to share with people and set conditions for battlefield commanders to make decisions about what they were seeing on the ground. So if we would go out and get imagery to collect the imagery to share with the commanders about like what this looks like or what this site was. So basically acting as a collection, a visual information collection team to share with the commanders of what that looked like. So that was, so as the war was raging on in Iraq, Afghanistan was still going on in the background as well. In 2007, I came back home, started a master's degree, but then got mobilized again in 2008. So I went back to the very same place that I was in Fallujah and Ramadi because the war was still going on, although they did have a turn of the tide where we call it the awakening. The Iraqis in Anbar province, specifically Fallujah and Ramadi, all the sheikhs and the influential people had an awakening. They call it the Anbar Awakening. And so once they said, look, we're going to fight this insurgency from Al-Qaeda, we're going to put this down once and for all. And we all joined forces and turned the tide. And so when I went back in 2008, it was an amazing sight. I would not have believed, if I wouldn't gone there myself, that the violence was down. People were really going to work and going to school, and they had paved the roads over. So all the roads had potholes in them from all the IEDs and all the explosions. So that was completely fixed. And the schools were repainted, the buildings were rebuilt, and it was like an awakening occurred. And so the conditions were a lot safer, luckily, in 2008, although very still dangerous. But in 2008, I spent a year there, and then I came back home. For a short time, I finished my master's degree. So finally, I got these my education done, plus these life enriching experiences in between deployments.
What was your most memorable assignment during this time?
Well, there's so many, but they're all blurring together now after all these deployments. I did end up doing follow-on deployments back to Afghanistan twice. I went back in 2013 and then again in 2018. So while I would be really hard pressed to say one specific memorable experience, because there was literally blood, sweat, and tears into each deployment, because when you go, you mentally gear up and you go, not knowing if it's going to be, the last time, whether it's an accident or a combat related or a health issue, you really do have to mentally and emotionally prepare for not coming home. But in 2006 in Iraq, so many people were getting killed. So many colleagues, fellow Marines and service members were being killed. But one person in particular was killed, was my boss. And it was a female Marine, and she was our media relations officer. And so on a mission, on an assignment that literally I could have been on just as well, she was escorting media to a site, and her Humvee, her military vehicle, patrol vehicle, was hit by an IED, and it killed 3 people in the vehicle. Herself, an Army soldier who was the gunner up on the mounted gun, and then another person in the vehicle, another Army officer, a captain, and all 3 of them were killed instantly, for the most part, we're told. So they didn't suffer much, but it was a terrible, terrible IED, a 500-pound bomb below the surface of the road. When our vehicle rolls over it, it triggers it, and then it exploded, and then the vehicle caught fire. So on that day, it was December 6th, 2006. It was really an awful day when the phone call came to our office. And my boss, the director of public affairs, summoned me to gather everyone to come to the office in person, go around the camp, get the people. And then the chaplain walked in to our office. And I didn't at this time know what the meeting was about. I just went and got everyone and knew it was something critical. I wasn't sure what, but when that news came that she had been killed instantly, with no ambiguity about it, it was very heartbreaking. And then the reality really set in, is that when you go on deployment, you really do have to prepare for the worst. And so I thought that whole time, I thought if anybody was going to get hit, it would have been me, because I was out every day with the troops, and she would go out occasionally, but not very often. So it was
Mm.
just this one time. It was very unfortunate. But they were in a convoy escorting reporters from Newsweek magazine and Fox News, actually. And they were in a long convoy, and that was just that one vehicle that was hit. And so she and two others died instantly. So it's moments like that, then you realize, like, I am really lucky to be here and come back uninjured, and being able to live. So I like to help other veterans put it in perspective. Veterans that come back from a combat or a dangerous situation, where if someone did die, your friends die, your colleagues die, fellow service members, um, that you go on with your life with enthusiasm. And yes, while it may be sad and depressing sometimes, but to go and live the best you can, because that's what they would want you to do. So I know her name was Megan McClung, bright red hair, uh, uber fitness girl. She was a triathlete. She was a scholar. She attended the U.S. Naval Academy. So she was like what we call gung ho. She was very fit, and we just thought if anybody it would not have been her to get killed. But it just shows the breadth and of a battlefield is no longer just meant for infantry, right?
Mm.
In today's battlefield, anyone can be hit. And so, especially for a woman who was not a combat arms job. So it really shows that if anyone is willing to suit up and kit up and go forward and be in a hostile environment, they're risking it all just as much. So moving the needle in these ways, I've seen over the past 20 years, is that experiences like that can really shape you. And if you're not careful, it can lead people to a dark path if they're not careful about really understanding the meaning behind all of this, and like, what was all that for?
I have tremendous respect for any veteran who goes out into the field and risks their lives every day for the sake of your country. You know, I mean, it's something that you require. I don't even think bravery is the right word for it. It's because it sort of supersedes bravery. You know, I mean, to go out there and not know whether you're going to survive the day, it's I can't even comprehend to think what goes on in people's heads at that point in time, especially when you're in the midst of battle. So I can imagine it to be tremendously difficult, tremendously difficult. And I have tremendous respect for anyone who goes out in the field and put their lives on the line every single day to do this for the sake of their country. I mean, kudos to you and to all of the Army veterans for doing so.
Well, thank you. And I do too. I mean, and that's why we're drawn to service, is because we look at someone else, we say, I want to be, that's what I want. I want to be a part of that group. But in America, we definitely take pride in the patriot spirit and spirit of service, and we want to continue to serve, just like in other countries. Obviously, every country has their either it's compulsory or they want to serve in their countries and their nation, defending their nation. Um, and it is a noble calling. And so I feel very fortunate to have chosen that path, and people I work with, we could all be doing 1,000 other things in life, but for those who choose that service, there really is a high level of admiration. And so I'm grateful to have been a part of it. But looking back at some of those really difficult times was, you know, just really got to like put things in perspective and carry on, and just really carry on the spirit of their name, or and then prepare the next generation that burden will be on their shoulders. And so why we tell our stories is to bring in the next generation of young warriors, but patriots who want to serve. And so that next generation is important, because as we've seen in the past year in our country, in America especially, freedom is not free and democracy is not free. And so it always has to continue to tell those stories of people who've gone before you.
What's it like for you personally to have been on the battlefield?
Well, capturing imagery, being on the battlefield is one thing, but capturing imagery, which was my mission to be there, people always say, well, would you shoot a camera or shoot a gun? And I say both, because my primary job as a Marine or as a military member is always to defend life, defend my comrade's life, but also the mission of documenting what is happening in that moment in time. So we look back at some iconic photos of combat. uh, um, Without that imagery, we don't really have a visual way to understand it. So those people that have gone before, those old black and white photos from World War II, those old photos from Vietnam, without that imagery, it would be hard to understand and retell those stories. So I always like to say we share the courage. So our job is to share the courage of other people so people really understand. So having the honor of being in a position to get the photo, to get the shot, to share the story of the courage that it takes to be there in the first place, really, as when you focus in on why am I here? Oh, it's because people are relying on me to get that photo, that moment in time, really that nanosecond of time could last a generation and mean so much to so many people many years from now. If 10, 20, 30 years from now people are viewing pictures that I took, then I feel like I've definitely done my part in carrying, that load of being able to share that imagery. So I really took that very seriously, of being able to take the imagery that will be seen right in the moment or like on the evening news. So we would satellite up video so the media could air it that night. Um, so people can in real time understand what was happening on the battlefield, but for many years to come. And so when you put a mission like that and you tell people on my team, your work is important. Don't think just because you're not on the infantry team that your work is less important. You're also important. So I never want to downplay those non-infantry roles, because those are just as important. Everyone has a role to play. And no, even the cook or the truck drivers, everyone has an important role, but ours was to document the action.
Were you ever afraid for your life at all?
I believe there were times where there were definite reasons to be fearful, for sure. Whether it was bullets whizzing overhead, or you hear the impact of a mortar round just 50 meters away, and you hear the shrapnel hitting everywhere. Um, you definitely go, whoa, that was a close call. When you hear a mortar round dropping nearby, you realize that if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, or a few times, some close calls where we were at a Iraqi police station, covering a story about the brave Iraqis who were learning how to be policemen to patrol their streets. And just 15 minutes after we left that police station, a suicide vest bomber came in and blew it up and killed many people. So we think, whoa, that was a close call. Maybe they were targeting us because we were U.S. and we were just there, and he came in just a few minutes too late. So that impact is never lost on me. That I realized that I definitely feel lucky. I was more lucky than anything. But so mentally checking, knowing the danger, knowing the danger. So when you leave and you fly from your safety of your home to go forward, you really do understand the importance and the impact of the work you're doing. And knowing that when you write your will, the 18, 19, 20-year-old Marines who have to write their own will, and you have to outline how you'd like to be buried, how you'd like to have your funeral service, who you'd like to be as pallbearers, who you'd like to read your memorial, what would your headstone read? Then you when you write all this out and you realize, like, I really could not make it back. So you go in knowing all this ahead of time. So that can be difficult for some people. And when you come home with one less person, that makes an impact. There's a
Mm.
somber feeling to that. But we all know that it's a very adult decision that you make when you join the military. And if you were to ask those people if you could talk to them, they would say, I died doing exactly what I knew the consequences, but I did it anyways. And so, and this goes for not just US, but for any nation that has an organized military. They all, and I've worked with many different countries, many different countries, militaries, and there's always that one common theme of patriotism and knowing the consequences, but we do it anyways.
Yeah, you've been around the block with like into a whole bunch of countries. I think Romania as well, Guam
Yes,
too, which is an
yes.
overseas territory. Yeah.
Yeah, US territory and the Guam National Guard. I've also been to, one of my favorite places was Sri Lanka. I was in Sri Lanka twice, and I worked with Sri Lankan Navy, the Sri Lankan Army, and there's just always a common bond with working with other nations' militaries. And so that's been one of the best experiences I've had, is the travel, having a global mindset, being able to work with other countries and being received by other countries in a positive way. And so being able to be an ambassador, well, not a formal ambassador, but an ambassador for the United States, and having good positive relations with other countries can go a long way. So every person in uniform that gets to work with another country's person in uniform acts as an ambassador. And those are special relationships that everyone can remember, and it's life enriching, and it stays with you for the rest of your life.
I can imagine. I assume there's some sort of mutual respect, which is like an underlying mutual respect when you meet someone from another nation who also serves in the army, because y'all are sort of aware of the consequences of doing that, and y'all have this mutual respect. I can totally see that happening. Actually, I can totally see that happening.
Yeah.
When you were in Guam, what's it like? I've heard so much about Guam. I've seen imagery of Guam as well. It's like if America was on some island in the middle. Well, it is an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I believe it's part of Micronesia. Is it? Am I right in saying that? Micronesia?
That's correct. It
Hmm.
is. It is a U.S. territory. So I get this a lot. I lived on Guam for 5 years. So I was working as a federal employee for the U.S. government, living and working on Guam as a correspondent, covering all the military's large scale exercises. And when the job came up, I was a little bit unsure about what to expect, because I really hadn't heard too much about what the conditions were like, or really where it was. I had to look on a map, to be honest. So we were pleasantly surprised when we got there. We lived there for 5 years, my husband and I, and it was an amazing experience, a mix of rich culture. So Guam has about 180,000 people, and they are Guamanian people, native there. They have their own language. Of course, they have full U.S. citizenship. They're all U.S. citizens, although they can't vote in the presidential elections. They have their own regional elections where they have
Hmm.
different senators for different regions of the island of Guam, but it is full US citizen. They use the US dollar. Heavy tourism industry, tourists from Japan, Korea, China, even, and Russia. All these, Asian countries, it's an easy 3 or 4 or 5 hour flight from all these places. So they come there on vacation. So it's a really robust tourism location because of the beautiful beaches, the beautiful warm water, the hiking, the tropical environment, the history there. So during World War II, so the irony of me going there is very interesting. So my grandfather, who was a Marine, it's my dad's dad, my grandfather and my dad's mother, my grandmother and my grandfather both had served on Guam. My grandfather was a Marine, my grandmother was an Army nurse, and they met on Guam during the war. So at the time, the U.S. had liberated Guam, was under Japanese control for 3.5 years during the war. They had tortured the Guamanians. They had enslaved them for 3.5 years. So the U.S. came in, liberated the island, and as part of the island hopping campaigns of World War II. And so my grandfather and my grandmother met there. When the war was over, they came home, they got married and started their family. So I had always heard of stories about Guam and them being on Guam. I just never knew exactly what, only until I went there and they had already passed. So I couldn't ask them, like, where were you exactly on the island? You can
Hmm.
drive around the entire island in 2 hours. So I knew they
Oh,
were
it's
there
that small.
somewhere. Yeah, that's small. So it really is a tight knit community there. So since then I've found pictures of them on Guam, so I know exactly where oh, that's this beach or that beach. I know exactly where they were, and they always had fond memories of talking about the local people there. But proud to have served during the liberation of Guam. My grandfather was always fly the Guamanian flag on the Liberation Day of July 17th. And so I always knew about it, but being able to be stationed there and live it myself was wonderful. So from there, I got to travel to so many places in Asia. I went to Singapore, Sri Lanka, as I mentioned, Malaysia, Japan, the Republic of Palau, and these were all on assignment. So we have military operations and partnerships with all these Asian countries, and so that was just a wonderful experience to be able to shoot and move out there, covering the stories and shared partnerships that we have with all these nations. That our military, our Navy and Marines and Army are all engaged in military training exercises with these countries ongoing. People in the US may not know it all the time, but at any given time, there's going to be some partnership happening. So it was a great experience. But we just recently relocated back to the mainland. We call it the mainland here, back in California on continental United States. So we're in California, and I was born and raised in California. So I feel like we're coming home to a very familiar place. But we got here in February. We were right when COVID hit, right? So we were one of the last flights off Guam before they completely shut things down. So with that, the COVID turn has really sort of put a damper on us being back in the States and being able to go see family and visit freely. We haven't been able to do that, but that's okay. We'll do that when it's safer conditions. My husband is actually born and raised in Germany, and so he German background. Speaks German. His parents still live in Germany, family all still in Germany. So he hasn't been able to go visit them yet because of COVID.
Yeah, COVID has put a dent in everyone's business, honestly.
Yeah.
I would
So
love to travel myself. I've been wanting to go to Vietnam for the longest time. I saw this documentary on the Vietnam War and it just fascinated me so much. I was just like, I have to go to this country and see what it's all about. And have you ever been to Vietnam? No,
unfortunately, no, I
no.
haven't.
Yeah, I hear it's
I've
super
heard
cheap.
amazing things, and Cambodia too. I've heard
Hmm.
Cambodia is just as exclusive and off the beaten path, but Vietnam, I've heard nothing but great things about. So I hope you
Yeah,
get there.
I hope so too. I was planning on this year, but given the fact, I don't think the vaccine's gonna come out to us anytime soon.
Oh
So
gosh,
yeah,
yeah.
it's gonna be pretty messed up. But hopefully then I can travel to Vietnam and maybe go to Hanoi or something. I don't know. Let's see. But for
Yeah.
you,
So
mhm,
this year we're all daydreaming about planning our trips for when things open up. And really putting thought into that of where, when it's taken away from you, you realize, wow, the freedoms that we all enjoy are like that easy to be taken away in a heartbeat. And who could have seen this coming? So I'm grateful for previous travel, but like you, I definitely look forward to that itch of like, I gotta go somewhere interesting so I can travel. You're never really the same person after you've done international travel. I'm
right.
sure you feel the same way. Yeah.
Absolutely. When you see different cultures. So we were speaking in the beginning of the show before we started recording. I'm from India, and the culture is just so drastically different back there. Everything about it is just so drastically different. When it comes to families, and in particular, you have like these massive families living together all under one roof, and it's just so different from everything over here. Just the lifestyle, the food, of course. Don't get me wrong, I love American food, and North American food in particular. But the Indian food is just like another level. Honestly, I just love the Indian food. But it's so different because you get to see how different cultures interact with each other, and you get to learn so much more. And things which we sort of take for granted over here, we don't really take for granted in a country like India. And some of the divisiveness which we see in the West these days, in particular, you don't really see that divisiveness in India or in some of the Eastern countries. In fact, because there are so many other struggles which they have over there. When I was in Bombay, and I was born and raised in Bombay, I would take a taxi to go to work every day, and it used to be cheap. It would be like $1 to travel maybe 6, 7 miles or so to get to work. So I would just take a taxi every day, and religiously, whenever I would pull up at this one signal, there would be this beggar woman with a child in her hand, coming in and asking for money. And she would see me all the time, and so she sort of knew me. So she would come and say hello to me. And there were these times where she would be selling these little small little fans which she would make, and just for fun, I would buy them off her. It was about 5 rupees or so. And when now that I'm thinking about it, it's just so strange how different life is in the West in comparison. And the kind of things that we do take for granted. Like, I would never see a woman with a small 6 to 10 month old child over here, but in India it's just commonplace. In fact, it's so common that you just sort of get desensitized to it. And one of my friends went to India from Canada, and she saw the poverty over there, and she started crying. um she's like, how can people live like this? And but the thing is, when you don't know any better, you're not this is the best which you have, right? So if you don't know anything better, you've not seen a better life, you're this is all you know. You're not gonna get anything more out of it, right? So I think it's important, like you said, to see other countries in the world and see how they function, and the lifestyles, the cultures, and everything. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, most Americans don't have a passport. I forget the percentage, but
Really.
eh, yeah, and so they, overseas travel is not as high as, other countries maybe, as far as, because there's so much to see here in the States, and there's just some people who would refuse to do any overseas or foreign travel. They just want to stay within the United States. But for military members who get the fortunate opportunity to do overseas travel, it really is life enriching, because then you realize, you come home and you go, I really do have it good. It may not be perfect, but we don't see the poverty and the extreme conditions that you do in some other foreign countries. And so it really does frame your gratitude, your gratitude lens of being grateful for the things that we do have here. And so it almost is like a circular. I'm so grateful for the comforts that we have here. I'm even more willing to serve and protect it, even more so, because if not me, then whom? Like, if
Mhm.
it's not me, and a lot of parents, American parents, don't want, not my child. I don't want my child to serve, because it's too dangerous or it's not a good lifestyle. But then who? Like, who among us is expected to do this, do the missions? Who is it going to be? And we always need to cultivate that next generation of service members. So we try to share with them all the great, the reasons why we should serve. Or it's not meant for everyone, and that's okay. But we definitely consider global travel as being one of the best perks of service, of military service, is getting to meet other people from other countries. While that's just fun in itself, but you come back with you hit the reset button and go, okay, my house, my street, my car, my shopping market is just fine. Because when you
Yeah,
get to experience those things, yeah.
I agree.
So
And having lived in North America for now, this is the seventh year. Um, I sort of I don't want to go off on a tangent, but some of the complaints I see that people have over here, and there's the how surface level these complaints are in comparison to other countries, like I mentioned, like the poverty and the extreme conditions in these other countries as well. Really, I feel there needs to be much more of a broader perspective taken up, especially with the general population, or at least people need to be exposed to other cultures. We have this entire diversity and inclusion thing over here in Canada, which is absolutely fine. I'm all for diversity and inclusion, but we need to also have more of an understanding as to how certain other cultures function and how certain etiquettes and certain behaviors and certain lifestyles are different abroad from the way we have it in this country over here. And that's the only way we can sort of educate ourselves to say, hey, we may have our own share of problems over here, but really we have it so good in comparison. So let's try and do something to ensure that we keep this good, right? Can we be better? Of course we can be better. There's no way that we've already reached perfection, of course, but there is that need for us to understand the other side of things as well, and to stop looking through our own lenses from the tunnel vision that we have come to develop in this day and age, right? So that's just how I feel about the situation in this in North America in particular. And this is just from someone who's coming from an outsider perspective and having seen the outside. And I've lived like 24 years in India, so I've seen like the entire shebang over there. It's a crazy place. If you ever go to India, it's an amazingly crazy place. It's an assault on your senses, with the people, that the noise and the just the sounds, the sights that you get to see and everything. It's fantastic. I've traveled to a few other places around the world as well, but honestly, India is by far one of the craziest places I've ever lived in or been in so far.
I would love to visit. It sounds amazing. Um, I like what you said with the diversity and inclusion is great, but it doesn't really solve a problem, the issue when people haven't traveled to be the outsider sometimes. Be the outsider for a while in a foreign place, and then then you really get to push your limits of what the world is all about. It's fine to
Absolutely.
be diverse and include people into your sphere, but put yourself into an outsider position, and then see how you feel. And then you come
Absolutely.
back and you're like, okay, I feel I get it now, you know?
Absolutely. And a lot of the minorities over here, and I consider myself a minority as well, even though I look white, I'm actually brown on the inside. But a lot of the minorities over here, I feel they feel the same way as well, because I know a lot of minorities, since I speak the language as well. And they say the kind of problems which people have over here. With all the phobias which people throw around. You can just name all the phobias which people have these days. The transphobia, homophobia, and all of this stuff. They're like, this is nothing compared to the actual problems which people face in our country. There's so much more shit that we have to solve, that all of this other stuff sort of takes a big backseat. It's not even in the theater, it's that far behind. It's like a dot on the horizon. So you know um just from getting from minorities perspective, and we have these, like I said, diversity and inclusion in the workplace and stuff. I was on a call for a diversity and inclusion call, and they brought someone on from Sri Lanka as well. And they asked her, do you feel like you've been excluded and stuff? And she was like, no, actually I feel people are pretty inclusive over here. But they wanted the narrative to be, no, I'm feeling excluded, I'm feeling,
Mm.
I don't feel included in anything, and I feel like people have been racist towards me and stuff. And that's a narrative which they wanted to channel, really. But she's like, nope, I'm fine. there are people who don't understand my accent, and that's understandable because you've seen the Sri Lankan accent as well. It's not when you speak English, it's very fast. It's not exactly easy to understand. And she was like, yeah, it's fine. I understand it. It's nothing special. Where I come from, you should see the kind of stuff which we have to go through. and, and
Yeah,
that really shut them up.
right,
So, um,
right.
I think in a way these diversity and inclusion calls which they have every now and then in the workplace, and it's commonplace in Canada, at least. I'm not sure how it is in the US, but a lot of these different organizations are having these calls to bring awareness to the subject and stuff, which is fine and all, but they're still looking at it from their own shoes. And like you rightly said, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and look at it from their lens itself, because if you're going to be constantly looking through your own lens, you're not going to see the other side.
It makes it difficult, but it's interesting you brought that up. My husband, being German, born and raised in Germany, although he's Caucasian, when he speaks, he does have a German accent, a little bit of a German accent. Speaks English fine, but a little bit of a German. So people say, well, where are you from? And they say Germany. And so even the Americans' perception of Germany, for those who have never been to Germany, what they see in the movies is like Nazi
Ah,
or something. And then there's always this like, are you must
I,
be Nazi, or so it sometimes at least the
it's so
American
one-dimensional,
perspective
isn't it?
is what is the only thing they know about Germany is what they see in the movies, which is not always flattering. And so he even has experienced some sort of standoffish. So when people say it's a race thing or a language thing, it's sometimes just Americans in general, or anyone who's not of the same, has a standoffish preconceived notion. And so yeah, America has some struggles, and the military, luckily, we definitely attract a wide, diverse group. And I would have met people that I would have never met in a million years. Being from California, I meet people from states like Texas or Arkansas or Florida, and just of different cultures that even within our 50 states,
There's
we have different.
subcultures, yeah.
Yes. And so it brings together people all under one roof, and you kind of say, it doesn't matter where you came from. All that matters is that you're with us now and we're all one team. And so although it's a unique experience, because when you are life or death situations, you definitely bond with people, and all the color and the accents and go out the window from people. And that's really what I love about the military, is that none of that matters. None of it really.
As it
It doesn't
shouldn't.
matter.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
shouldn't matter. I feel people tend to take things a little too seriously nowadays with with these things, especially in and the mainstream media. You've seen how it's like as well. So, I don't want to go down
Yeah.
that rabbit hole because that's going to be super deep. But one last thing before you go. What is next on your radar?
Well, thank you for asking, Kane. Actually, after relocating back to the States and having a year of COVID, and it really has, I think I'm not alone in saying that we've all sort of pivoted. And what is the meaning? What is this event trying to tell us, right? What is going on in our lives that we need to make a change, make more of an impact? And so I've done some thinking about ways to make an impact. I currently work as a civilian public affairs officer for a military unit here in San Diego. I'm also in the Navy Reserve. So I transitioned to the Navy Reserves as a public affairs officer, and I continue to do that. And I love that network of people. But I'm actually going to be writing a book as a passion project, really. So coming up this year, we'll be celebrating or commemorating really the anniversary of 9/11, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And so I'm going to commemorate this event with some short stories and imagery from the base I'm stationed at is Camp Pendleton, California. If anyone wants to go and look that up, it's beautifully located on the coast of California, in between Orange County and San Diego. It's the largest military training base, but more Marines from Camp Pendleton were killed since 9/11 in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan than any other base in the country. And so this base in particular has taken the brunt of the casualties, is because most of the combat forces have come from this particular location. So the surrounding communities in this area, cities like Oceanside, Carlsbad, Dana Point, and Fallbrook, California, have all really rallied around this community to support the ones left behind, the spouses that are now widows, the children that don't have their parent anymore. They've either stayed in the area, or they'll always remember Camp Pendleton as being a special place, because that's where the line of debarkation, I'd say, where their military service member left but never came back. So I'm going to be putting that together coming up for the 9/11 commemoration. But I'm also going to be doing some more speaking and working with veterans. And so that's really, now that I'm sort of in a payback mode, I want to share and help foster any kind of support network that I can, do some coaching, some training with some veterans, and really making sure that I put a stamp on the next generation of those either coming into the field, and mentoring those that they're in, maybe following me in my footsteps of transition. Maybe they're transitioning to a civilian job, which can be awfully scary for people who have retiring after 20 years. The military is all they know, and they're going to be trying to get into the workforce. So those are kind of some things that I'll be looking to do in this next coming up year. So it's fine to just keep marching along in your own zone, but I like to take the path where it's leading me, and doing some more online virtual discussions with colleagues about important topics. Since we can't meet in person, really, our seminars and our workshops are on hold for now. So developing a way to communicate and just brainstorm and collaborate with people is stepping into that realm of the next generation of combat correspondents and preparing them for, I won't say the next war, but we'll always have to keep our eye on the horizon. Yeah, our fingers crossed. Prepare for war, pray for peace, but prepare for war if that's the case. And so a lot of times we put an emphasis on after action reports and lessons learned and what did we learn from this experience. And if we don't, we can write it down in a report, but when it gets buried and it never is shared with the next generation, I do see some young kids coming up. I say kids, but young Marines in their 20s struggling with some of the same issues that I had. And I always tell people, I made 1,000 mistakes. You don't need to make mine. Make your own mistakes, but here's what really I failed at. You don't here's what worked. Here's how things work. Great. Try this. And cut them off at the head, prevent them from making the same mistakes. I want to try to fill that void.
That's amazing. More power to you. I'm so happy to see that you're doing this, you know. I mean, even in the midst of these turbulent times over here with COVID and all of that, you know, it's amazing to see the amount of effort and work you put into the stuff that you do, you know, especially with the coaching and the training, you know, and you know, trying to teach these young people, you know, don't make the same mistakes that I did. This is what I did, and this is what you should do. And I think that's fantastic. You know, you're passing on your own knowledge to benefit someone else, and I think that's amazing. And your book as well. When do you expect it to be released?
Well, I hope late August, early September, just in time for 9/11. It should help people just frame our little corner of the world here. It'll be featuring the Camp Pendleton Marines and the sacrifice that they've made. It's sort of America's hometown. Heroes live here, and there's new memorials all over the base, with etched stone, with etched their names, the ones who have fallen, their name in stone. And so if not me, who, then I want to make sure that people know that there was great sacrifices over the last 20 years. It's sort of a milestone just to do some reflection on what the hell just happened over the past 20 years, and all those that have made we haven't forgotten them. We may have all moved on, and as they would want, and it's healthy to move on and do bigger things, but we have not forgotten their sacrifices. And so if I can curate some short stories and some photos of the past 20 years and put that together in a book for people to tangibly hold and feel that they're remembering those heroes. Some just 18, 19, 20 years old, never even really had a chance to live, but we asked them to go to a foreign country, risk it all. The least we can do is remember their sacrifices. So it's a passion project, and COVID really got me thinking of more ways, just like you have with doing your podcast, of what can I do to be of more impact to people. So
Absolutely.
I keep up the good work in what you're doing. You
Thank
have
you
a great
kindly.
following. Yeah, you have a good following going, and you're really using your time with other people, maybe watching Netflix or binge watching movies. You know, there are a few people out there like yourself also just trying to make an impact and be of service to people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to let you go. I know we've gone a bit over time, but thank you again. It was an amazing conversation. Love the stuff which you're doing. Really. I mean, you're an inspiration for a lot of people, I'm sure, you know, so thank you again. It's an honor to speak with you, and all the best for your book. And, you know, once you do publish it, you know, if you can just send me the link, I would love to read it. I'm really
Oh,
interested in
sure.
this stuff. So please do. I'll
You
definitely
bet.
buy it off.
Oh, thank you so
Right.
much, Kane. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Bye.